The Roscoe Palm Show on Cape Conscious Media and Africa Radio. That's right, we're trying something new. We're on video on Cape Conscious Media, live on Facebook, and a simulcast or rebroadcast on Africa Radio. Today, we've got Dr. Phillip Dexter, the chairperson of Armscor. We'll talk state-owned enterprises, Eskom, and also all about that ship that we can't seem to get out of our heads. Also, Tertius Simmers allegedly using state resources to campaign in the Southern Cape. Speaking of those by-elections in that area, the Democratic Alliance alleged to be engaged in voter registration fraud, as those by-elections are attracting national leaders from all political parties in 3 wards, Ward 16, Ward 20 and Ward 27. Elsewhere on the fringes of politics, the Congress of the People, or rather the Congress of the Person, not deregistered from taking part in the elections, but their parliamentary allowance has been cut off because they did not submit audited financial statements in time. My name is Roscoe Palm, and welcome to the show. Nantal, we're a day late, but not $1 short.
That's what they say. I must say, you're looking smart today.
Thank you. I came from somewhere very important to be somewhere even more important.
Awesome.
That's here today. And I thought, we got a very important guest. It's not every day that we pull a chairperson of the board of a state-owned enterprise. So I thought I'd better look sharp.
It's good.
Gotta look sharp. But let's before we get to Phillip, let's talk about the story in the Southern Cape. These national leaders are there in full force in George. Helen Zille's there, Gayton McKenzie's there. Let's start with Action SA. So they have deployed a lot of resources to this by-election. Now, for those of you listening, you can check us out on YouTube, Cape Conscious Media. But let's play this video about the some of the festivities that Action SA, or rather, sorry, not Action SA, the Patriotic Alliance, Gayton McKenzie's Patriotic Alliance, have deployed to George ahead of the by-elections. Take a look at this. I mean, that's not just guys in suits that they've deployed, even though that's fairly cool. They've also apparently bought or rented electronic advertising boards that cost about 4,500 Rand per day. And they've had that for just short of a month. So you do the math, 4,500 Rand multiplied by, let's say, 30 days. That's a lot of money. And for in the Southern Cape, it's not as though they will flip the municipality. I think that a lot of these national leaders are being deployed there in order to make a statement ahead of the elections that are coming next year. It's more about rolling out the public relations machine than making any difference in that municipality.
But let me put it this way. Is it worth the money? Is it worth the juice? Is the squeeze worth the juice?
The juice worth the squeeze? The squeeze worth the juice? I don't know. I mean, everything's inverted, so maybe the squeeze is worth the juice.
But I'm just saying, is it worth? Why go out like that, man?
If Action SA, if they can say, rather Patriot, I'm confusing parties that have green as their color. If they can say, look, we have increased by 500%, even if that 500% is going from 1 voter to 5 voters, or whatever the case may be, they can say, hey, look, we're growing all over the country, even in a place like George. But yeah,
more like bragging rights to say.
Bragging rights to achieve some sort of momentum. But also a little birdie told me that the Patriotic Alliance have been sending people to Israel to study how those coalitions work. Now, I don't know whether Israel, I don't think it's the model of a functional constitutional democracy. In fact, it's an anti-constitutional non-democracy. But it seems that if this is true, it seems that there may be an influx of foreign money, particularly Israeli money coming into our political system to influence a particular outcome, especially with coalitions being on the cards nationally.
That's actually very interesting.
They didn't just send anybody. It's Gayton and Kenny, the leaders are going.
Wow, so we've got breaking news here that Kenny Kunene and Gayton McKenzie are currently on a jaunt to Israel to...
Well, I'm sure they're waiting to finish the by-election.
Okay, yeah, so they're invited there. That's very interesting. So, I mean, the money, as we can see, that stuff doesn't come cheap.
But my question is, what would they, the funders, what would they want in return?
Everyone's funding to get the ANC out of power. That's the game. Regime change is the game.
So then there's another game that's being played allegedly, is the manipulation of the voters' roll. Again, these are charges made by Good and Brett Herron, friend of the show, was here, I think, a few weeks ago. So they have actually approached the Electoral Court. Let's pull up that. That article from Eyewitness News. Western Cape Good Party accuses DA of voter registration fraud in George by-elections. The Good Party in the Western Cape has accused the Democratic Alliance of voter registration fraud in George and submitted a complaint with the Independent Electoral Commission. So this story is live, and today the Good Party has filed papers to the Electoral Court to postpone the elections. Now, the Good Party alleges that it has evidence of a list of names of residents of Thembalethu where there was no by-election who were fraudulently re-registered as residents of Borchards. Brett Herron alleged that over 300 people were registered as living in one particular address. So the impact of that, the way this would work is that people from another ward, from a different voters' roll, would then be eligible to vote in an election and influence the results of an election, where they would usually not be allowed to vote in. So it's if this is true, then it tilts the balance in favor of the DA. The DA do have a majority, but again, these parties are looking for an overwhelming majority. They're looking for the big PR win in the eyes of the media. Yeah. And the other story that's come out from the ANC, as far as those by-elections in George are concerned, the ANC released a statement about alleging that the provincial leader of the DA, Tertius Simmers, unethically used state-owned resources. Now, if you're joining us on radio on Africa, there's an image and it's not really clear, but they allege that is Tertius Simmers driving while he was canvassing ahead of the by-elections, drove the George Municipality's traffic services vehicle during a DA motorcade. I can't see that is Tertius Simmers. But there's also a video that the ANC have alleged that this is Tertius Simmers driving a traffic vehicle. Let's have a look at that one. Let's see if we can spot it. It's a very short video. I mean... Again, I mean, we can't see that as Tertius Simmers, but the statement of...
But it's a DA...
It's a DA motorcade, yeah. So if it's true that Tertius Simmers is driving around in the traffic services vehicle, then it's clearly an abuse of state resources, which is not allowed to do.
The question I have is, how come he didn't get one of the BMWs that's lying
exactly
there?
I mean, they have all these BMWs that we spoke about.
He's the leader after all, you know.
Yeah. Maybe they couldn't drive it off the lot yet, you know. They put miles on that clock, on those clocks. But they say, the statement from the ANC says, this is not the first time that this MEC has been in trouble with the law. In the past, he faced allegations of impropriety when he was accused of electricity theft while serving as the DA councillor in George. Again, I've asked the provincial leadership of the DA for comment. As and when comment comes through, I will obviously I will allow them this platform to comment on that. But a lot of things happening in George. The by-elections to be held tomorrow. If you're listening on Africa Radio, you're listening from the future. Please SMS us what the results are. Maybe we can place a bet on it here in the past. And but yeah. Okay, so Philip, how are you doing, man?
Good.
Back by popular demand. The last time, it was just 40 minutes. I mean, the Cameron, Cameron Dugmo did over 2 hours. Yeah,
I don't have that much to say.
Not usually. So you are the chairperson of the board of Armscor. So for those not in the know, what is Armscor?
So Armscor is the government procurement agency that procures all the necessary arms and ammunition for the SANDF, sometimes for the police, correctional services, etc. Mm-hmm. And it also does research and development and, owns the IP, the intellectual property, mm-hmm. for some of the equipment that is manufactured in this country and exported.
Right. So basically, you have all the guns.
Well, not me personally.
Okay, but I'm just going to
the SANDF has the guns.
As though you have all the guns.
No, not me.
Pointed at me.
No.
But okay. So recently there's been some controversy in Armscor, and there is a News 24 article that came out. Armscor CEO accused of fraud and sexual misconduct. You're not the Armscor CEO, you're the chairperson of the board. So this CEO is serious allegations of fraud and a sex scandal have surfaced in the top office of the entity tasked with procuring weapons for the South African National Defence Force. City Press can reveal that Armscor CEO Solomzi Mbada is embroiled in a bitter dispute with his board of directors and refused to meet with the entity's chairperson, Phillip Dexter, and another board member on Friday evening. This article is dated on the 2nd of July. Philip, can you illuminate us on precisely what's happening with these allegations? They are quite serious.
Well, obviously they are serious, but I must say the article is unfortunate because the spin that the journalist has put on things is completely dishonest, quite frankly speaking. There were allegations made by unnamed sources, not only against the CEO, but later against me, accusing, as you rightly say, him of sexual misconduct and fraud, and then accusing me of taking money from suppliers to Armscor and releasing state secrets. Now, the journalist, I spoke to the journalist, and he indicated that he had impeccable sources. I mean, I happen to know who some of the sources are. Impeccable would be stretching it very far. The Armscor and all of our state-owned enterprises are often a contested terrain. There are people who want to do business with Armscor. There are people who have grievances, staff, etc., etc. Whistleblowing, which I think is a good thing, can also be weaponized, where people can make false allegations. So the whole point is we said to the press, well, we are busy investigating these allegations, obviously, because we take them seriously. And we asked them for the space to do that, but unfortunately they went and published this article. We've now, as far as the board is concerned, we've dealt with the allegations to the extent that we can, and we've reported that to the shareholder, which is the Department of Defense and the Minister. So, the Minister will give guidance on what we have to do. But I will say that, it is really unfortunate. In terms of this thing about a spat between the two of us, myself and the CEO, whilst there's often a tension between non-executive and executive directors, I can safely say that the idea that there's a spat between us is simply very far-fetched. The truth is, obviously, when these allegations were made, he had to recuse himself from the board, and he was upset by them. So he felt he didn't want to meet. Subsequent to that, we have met, and he attended the board meeting, and he attended the meeting with the shareholders. So, I think things are running normally at Armscor, and it's the nature of these things. You have to investigate these things properly, and if there is any abuse, including by me, then I should be prosecuted. I've indicated that I'm happy to have a lifestyle audit. They can look into my overdraft and see if anyone's been helping me to pay it off. They can check my Toyota Etios, to see whether I put mag wheels on it or anything like that. But yeah, I think we are accountable to the taxpayers, and a proper investigation must be done. Sometimes it's for no reason. It's a waste of money. But nonetheless, good governance means that all of these things must be investigated.
So what is the state of our armed services, in your opinion, as the chairperson of the Board of Armscor?
Well, look, I think we have a very dedicated SANDF. Unfortunately, budget cuts and constraints have meant that there's a lot of strain on the SANDF in terms of equipment. One of our jobs at Armscor is to ensure that we assist the SANDF maintain its capabilities. And it is a challenge to do that with a very limited budget. So it's one of the issues that we've raised as the board, and we'd like to see, some focus being given to ensure resources so that the men and women in uniform of our country can actually do their job. And also they should be protected and be able to be as safe as possible in a very dangerous working environment.
People often conflate Armscor and Denel. So
Yeah.
what are the different roles that these two SOEs play within our country?
Yeah, it's important because they do often conflate us. So originally Armscor and Denel under the National Party government was one organization. During the Kgosientsho negotiations and prior to democracy, the old government decided to separate the two. The notion being that for good governance, Armscor should focus on procurement and Denel should focus on manufacturing. And, that traditionally that was the role, but I think it also created some strategic and structural weaknesses, which we're now paying the price for. But generally that's it. We do the research, development, we purchase, and they do the manufacturing.
What arms do we manufacture in South Africa, and how has that changed over the last, let's say, 2 decades?
Well, as you know, Denel's been through a huge crisis. There's been a restructuring and a turnaround program. So it hasn't produced much for a long time. But historically, it was a center of excellence in defense. Produced the Rooivalk helicopter, the G5, G6 cannons, the T5, which is another heavy artillery, ammunition, drones, cameras for satellites, explosives, everything, electronic warfare systems. Denel's products have been world leaders, but unfortunately, as I say, the last period, until last year, and Armscor has been assisting Denel with that restructuring. So we're hoping to get it back on track, and we're hoping to see, some more outputs and jobs being created, and also providing for the SANDF.
I noticed that just the other day, I think 2 weeks ago, I saw that Denel made a profit of 390 million rand. Do you think that this is an indicator that Denel is out of the woods? I understand that you're speaking on a SOE that you are not a part of. But from your perspective as the chairperson of the board of Armscor and assisting Denel and the arms industry, do you think that this is a good thing, sustainable?
Well, it indicates that they have a surplus. I'm not sure profit would be the right term because, the money they received was not from trading. It was really a bailout from government to the tune of about 1.3 billion. And then they also had surplus money in their medical fund, which was then split between the employers and the employees. So that money was used to do the turnaround and the bailout. And I think that's a good thing. Mm. So they have a surplus of 300 million at their disposal, 390 million. Mm. Yeah, so that does mean that they can operate. Yeah, and let's hope that together with the orders they have and we're assisting them with that, would mean that they can start to become a healthy company again.
So then back in your field, back in speaking about Armscor, what are the arms and ammunitions and that we buy? Where do we buy from, and how do we deploy this material?
Well, we haven't bought much because I think the last big purchases were the arms deal, the frigates, submarines, the Gripen fighters, and so on. I think we routinely do purchase things that the SANDF would need, like spare parts for the various aircraft and vehicles that we have. And some of that would be procured locally and some internationally. And often things like specialist ammunition or things that we don't make here. So sometimes a lot of it would be electronic stuff. We are quite far behind the rest of the world in terms of drones and unmanned craft. In the aerial sense. In the naval sense, we're actually far ahead of many countries. Yeah.
A lot of the argument would be who would possibly invade us? Zimbabwe, Namibia? What is the case for keeping our military up to standard, up to scratch, and competitive with other countries around us?
Well, I think you should. Any sovereign state needs a military capability. The question as to what that capability should be is a matter of policy. So in our country, a defense review was done, and the shape of the SANDF as we have it at the moment was the outcome of that. I think a lot of people would agree that it's something that needs to be reviewed, but we do need to maintain a fighting force in the form of the SANDF that can protect our borders, that can be deployed with, but if the need be, if anybody were to try and attack us. But they also perform other roles. I mean, you'll have seen during the floods, the military and the helicopters in particular become very important in terms of assisting people. We have to guard our shoreline, our coastal line, and it's quite big. Our natural resources there, the fish, all those things that people rely on for a living. And that's the job of the Navy. And then you'll have seen that we play a very important role in peacekeeping, particularly on the African continent. So all the African countries who have capability collaborate, for example, in the DRC, in Sudan, Burundi. And I think we've played a tremendous role in helping to bring peace to some of those countries. So there is an argument for a strong, fit, capable SANDF. What I do think we need now is a policy review to make sure that it's fit for purpose.
Okay, well, staying more or less in the same wheelhouse, let's talk about the weapons that we did or did not, or maybe have loaded on the ship. So, did we or didn't we?
The Lady R.
The Lady R.
It's one of those sensationalist things. Somebody sees a ship, it's got Russian lettering on it. Well, we must be supplying weapons to Russia. The first thing I would say is whoever's commentating should remember that ships load and offload. So to make the assumption that it's loading, that's without any basis. Because it's covered by national security, I can't really comment as to what is, the details of it. And to be honest, as a board member, I don't even know because, we wouldn't deal with that level of detail. But I can say for sure that there were no weapons loaded onto the Lady R that were done in a legal and proper manner by anybody in the SANDF, the Navy, Armscor, anybody else. If anybody has loaded weapons, which I doubt, I'm 99% sure they didn't, that would have had to be done illegally. And the reason for that is that we have a very strong system of controls. We have a committee called the NCACC, and that committee is there to ensure that whoever we sell weapons to, ammunition, or anything of that nature, must be a country that has gone through a process of being vetted and checked by us to ensure that, all the things that relate to that country are fit and proper in terms of the UN resolutions, the way in which weapons are deployed, etc. They would never be deployed for countries to use in an offensive situation. It's for defensive, etc., etc. And you can.
Are these our standards? Or
No, this is our local. No,
okay.
Yeah, our local. But we are signatories to all the international legislation in terms of arms control. So these are globally, accepted norms. So, insofar as that goes, I can say that I know for sure that there was no application to export any arms or ammunition to Russia. So if that's the case, there's no application, nobody approved that. If somebody has done that, they've done it illegally. Now I would say, if you were going to take weapons out of the country illegally, you would not bring a big-ass ship and park it in Simonstown to load those things in a naval dockyard. I mean, that would be the stupidest thing anybody could do. There are many, many ways people smuggle weapons. And I'm sure if people wanted to do that, they could. They could put them in a container marked spare parts for cars, for instance, and pay somebody at the border to let it through. So the idea that we are so stupid in South Africa that we'd invite the Russians to bring a big ship in broad daylight and load it full of arms and ammunition.
In DA country.
In DA country,
Yeah. Yeah. So, you say that you're 99.999% sure that no weapons were loaded. The U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigady, says he'll swear, he'll bet his life on it, quote unquote. Who should I believe? Why would the ambassador lie?
Well, perhaps he was ill-informed or misinformed. But I personally think, there is an agenda to delegitimize our country and to portray us as a rogue nation because we have taken the view that we should be non-aligned in the current conflict in the Ukraine. So we are not prepared to choose sides, in other words. We are saying that that's a matter between the people of Ukraine and Russia, and it's also a matter for international institutions like the United Nations and so on to deal with. I think that's borne out by the fact that our president and other African leaders actually made a trip to Ukraine and to Russia to attempt to persuade the parties to sit down and talk to each other rather than shooting each other. But you see, there is an agenda, I think, driven by imperialist countries, and I think the US in particular, trying to force all the countries in the world into this position to help them destroy Russia. And whatever one may think of Russia, whether you think it's a democracy or not, whether you like President Putin or not, there is a principle that, no country should be doing that to another. But we know historically, I think America has invaded close to 400 countries. I was seeing today that the number of coups that America has funded in foreign countries is 81. The number that China has funded in foreign countries is 0. So, I think there is an agenda. And I think we should be proud of the fact that our president and our government have stood firm and maintained this non-aligned position. But obviously we're going to take flak for it.
Well, look, I want to draw a parallel situation for how we sell arms, or rather our due diligence as far as who we sell our arms to. Let's say, for example, if Saudi Arabia wants to buy arms from us, or Yemen wants to buy arms from us. Now, these two countries are in conflict with each other. How would the approach be made, and what is our due diligence that we put these countries through to decide whether or not to sell arms to them, step by step?
Oh gosh, I don't know all the details offhand because it's quite a complex process. But in simplistic terms, an order is received from a country. They want to buy the G6 cannon. So first of all, they have to make an application to the NCACC. An end user certificate has to be supplied. In other words, we can't sell arms to you if you're going to on-sell them to a third party. That's very important. And then that committee, which consists of the Ministers of Justice, International Relations, the Secretariat, people from SANDF, etc., all serve on that thing. A report is drafted for them saying, this is the country that's ordered, this is what they want the weapons for. And as you say, in the case where a conflict is taking place, as in Ukraine and Russia, we would firmly ensure that we don't supply any weapons to fuel that conflict. And I think that's the intention. Of course, it's not a perfect system, and there have been cases in the past, but I think it is one of the better regulatory regimes globally. And that's why I'm confident that, we would know if somebody had made an application to buy weapons from Russia. It would be common cause.
So why do you think we're being specifically dragged to pick a side in this particular conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, in the conflict, as I say, I think that the world is changing fundamentally, and I think the days of US hegemony and a unipolar world where one country dominates is fast becoming history. And the reason for that is the rise of China and its development as an economy. The fact that it's, on par with the US. The United States have stated that this is an existential threat to them. Quite why they would think that, is beyond me, because I think having strong trading partners, having business between countries is how you ensure peace. So what the US are doing, to my mind, is completely illogical, because they're doing the opposite. They're saying sanctions, no more buying from China, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the reasons are clear. They want to see China fail. I think that part of the assessment would be, well, if China's there, Russia's there, Iran's there, we're not able to take these people on. But if we knock them off one by one, destroy Russia, destroy Iran, destroy capabilities of other countries who are not aligned to the US, it would enable them to ultimately take on the People's Republic of China. And I mean, what's his name? Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of England, stated at the G7 that the UK now defines China as an existential threat to them. Again, the numbers speak for themselves. China has not invaded any European country, any African country. It's been involved in skirmishes along its borders with India, Pakistan, and so on. But those very countries who are saying that China is a threat have routinely invaded countries all over the world. In the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Libya. In South America, they've overthrown governments in South America. They've participated in coups, assassinated African leaders. But we are supposed to believe that they're the good guys, and these ones who just trade with us are the bad guys. So the agenda is clear, and I think it's something that we're going to have to deal with for a long time. I think the world's going to be an uncertain place for many, many years.
So you also take a lot of flack from the Daily Maverick, from Greg Mills and from
yes.
from these guys. Why do they have such a? Okay, well, let me read a portion of the article that Greg Mills penned. Let me just find this way. The last time this institute, referring to the Pan-African Institute for Socialism, of which you are director, took a shot at the Brentis Foundation, it was supposedly the spider at the center of a large web of intrigue. According to that article, the capture of South African independent media involves an opaque network of funders, editors, and publications facilitated by US State Department actors. This was written by Ray Hartley, the former editor of the Sunday Times and a research director of the Brentis Foundation. Do you stand by that?
Absolutely.
Why do you say that?
Well, because we did thorough research and we were able to point to money that comes from institutions in the US, which are known to be associated with or fronts for the CIA and for other government institutions. I think, it's quite clear if you look at the agenda of the Daily Maverick, what it's pushing. I mean, it's entirely pro-US, entirely in support of, Ukraine and anti-Russian. So that unlike me and the South African government, the Daily Maverick is not non-aligned. It's chosen a side in this fight. You would ask yourself, as a South African publication, why on earth would they be doing that? Well, I think it's that they have to pay the piper, because ultimately what the Daily Maverick is also doing is it's involved in this agenda to consistently and always vilify and delegitimize the ANC. And I think there is a program of what is known as regime change in this country. It's always been there. Various NGOs, funding for political parties, as Nantle was saying earlier. It's nothing new that foreigners are giving money to support opposition parties in South Africa. If you look around the world, that's been the pattern. In South America and the Middle East and so on, that's what these governments do. Instead of allowing us to deal with our own internal issues, they fund particular political parties who support them and toe their line ideologically. So I stand by it, and I think it's obvious if you read the Daily Maverick, And it's a shame, because when the Daily Maverick started out, it was actually an incredible publication. It was really gritty, against the grain, no holy cows. It took shots at everybody. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think I've ever seen an anti-DA article in the Daily Maverick in recent times. I don't think I've seen, anything other than anti-the ANC. If you read the Daily Maverick, South Africa is the most corrupt country in the world. The ANC is the most corrupt political party. The world is falling apart. We're a failed state. It's this whole narrative, And while we've got many challenges and many problems, that is just such a straw man that you'd have to be an idiot to believe it. And you'd have to be paid very well by somebody to write it and pretend that you're a journalist.
So Greg Mills and Ray Hartley, they work for the Brenthurst Foundation. Now, the Brenthurst Foundation are known to have funded the trip of John Steenhuisen to go look at things in the Ukraine. They funded a trip for the Archbishop of Cape Town to do the same thing. The Brenthurst Foundation is a foundation that's funded entirely by the Oppenheimer family. Why do you think this is problematic within our polity?
Well, it's not entirely funded by them.
Mainly. It
was started by them, but it's now also funded by various foreign governments and the Open Society Foundation and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Well, I think it is problematic because the wealthy and the elite of this country who have the resources are obviously trying to shape public opinion and political processes in this country in a particular manner. And the reason they want to do that is because of what they've always done in Africa, which is colonize us, exploit us, take our resources, and so on. Because the ANC has policies that go against that, what they'd like to see is to get rid of the ANC and to have a political party in power or an alliance of political parties who will toe their line and assist them to get back to the good old days, when South Africa belonged to Anglo-America. It wasn't called Anglo-America for nothing. Its shareholders came from England and America. So I think that's the agenda, and we've seen that in other countries, where they've overthrown political parties that have radical programs. Zimbabwe's another example. Whatever the faults of the regime in Zimbabwe, and there are many, it's quite clear that they've been punished for the fact that they did radical land reform. And you can go and look at countless other countries. If you look at Venezuela, exactly the same. And of course, the case of Cuba, which has been a peaceful country, never bothered anybody ever since it was formed, acted only in solidarity with the poor and the marginalized all over the world, has sent soldiers and doctors in solidarity with people across the globe. And it's done all of this while enduring sanctions and direct attempts to assassinate its leaders. I don't know how many times the CIA tried to kill Fidel Castro. So it's nothing new. It was there with us, as they say. I
like the one story of the assassination attempt of Fidel Castro. A woman was sent to kill him, and she, with clear instructions, and she came out, listen, I didn't kill him. I had sex with him. He was his magnetism. That's how you turn a would-be assassin into a comrade.
They didn't call him El Jefe for nothing.
El Jefe. Oh. Just to close off this Daily Maverick, Greg Mills and his pal, what's the dude's name? Greg Mills and Ray Hartley. Talk about the Daily Maverick. So they publish things on the Brentis Foundation page, and they are linked to many other institutes that are NATO aligned and US State Department aligned, like the Royal United Services Institute. I think Greg Mills was an advisor to one of the UK Defence Force generals as they stomped their way across Afghanistan. In the Daily Maverick, it's covered, when they talk about Ukraine, it's covered as War in Ukraine op-ed. Should this not be labeled as sponsored content or...
That's precisely the point, yeah. They're not being honest about it. You know, and I've said there's a double standard in this country. If you're a political party, you're required to reveal who your donors are. You know, what they do is they fudge the issue and, you know, they portray themselves as being independent, etc. But the truth is, media is always a contested terrain. What we've tried to do in this country is create rules to make it fair. What they're trying to do is do everything to dodge those rules. I mean, they are literally the dodgiest people ever. You know, and how can you trust people who behave in this manner? Meanwhile, they think that they should hold politicians to account for their excesses and for their biases and their, you know, their funders. But they think that they are unaccountable. This positioning themselves as the conscience of South Africa, you know, it's just utterly hypocritical.
I like the Daily Maverick. I like some of their journalists on crime, on courts. I like Vincent Kreyvach and stuff. I like Velani Ludidi on politics. I like there's somebody who also writes about gangs and courts. On every issue, they are like really on point, just except on international relations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they are. That's the thing. You know, they are very good journalists. And as I said, to my mind, it was an exceptional publication, but it's quite clear that there's a particular line that is pushing on international relations and on our government in this country. And that's the issue I have, you know. They used to publish me a lot as well, you know.
They don't anymore. They don't. I've spoken to a lot of people.
I even sent a rejoinder to one article and they just refused to publish it. So much for freedom of speech.
Yeah, exactly. Freedom of...
you're free to say what you like as long as I like it.
Yeah, exactly. That's, well, Branko Burkic, how's it, bro? Okay, last time you were here, we spoke at length about electricity and Eskom. And at that time, there was the newly appointed Minister of Electricity, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa. How do you think he's done so far?
Well, I think all of us would agree he's made a big difference, you know, in the sense that he's been active and going around the country trying to help sort problems out. We've had somewhat of a reprieve in terms of load shedding for a while. Obviously, I think now we're in winter, it's more difficult. But I think generally he's doing a good job. Yeah, I would say.
As opposed to, you know, Andre de Ruyter wasn't the Minister of Electricity. But do you think that the current setup of Eskom is better than the Andre de Ruyter regime?
Well, you know, I certainly think that they seem to be doing better because, and I think probably the reason why is that they're concentrating on doing their job instead of spending all their time criticizing other people and writing a book, perhaps, you know. It takes a lot of time to write a book. So generally I'd think so, you know, but I think the deeper problem is that it doesn't really matter who the CEO is or who the minister is if we don't address the structural reasons for load shedding. And, you know, those are historical. They go back a long way. You know, first of all, the way Eskom was founded and who its primary clients were, you know, this white minority and business in the country. Secondly, the fact that during the time when we were bringing the majority of South Africans into the grid as consumers, we were closing power stations down and not investing in new ones, except for the two big Kusile and Madupis. And then thirdly, the fact that with bringing in renewable energies was literally contested and stalled. So we lost a lot of time. And the real problem, therefore, is that we have an aging fleet and things don't work the way they were supposed to. You know, you can't run a generator at maximum speed without stopping at some point to fix it. And if you don't have enough generators, then when one breaks, it's a problem. When three, it's a massive issue. And that's, I think, where we're at. So the real issue is, how can we get government to shift to ensuring more investment into electricity generation, both by the government itself and by the private sector, because you need both because of the shortage of capital. I think, secondly, we've got to look at how we open up for households to generate electricity themselves. And I think a few of the municipalities have now moved in that direction. In many countries, you can sell electricity back to the grid. So if you put up solar panels or you put up a wind turbine, so there are lots of little things we could be doing. I think importantly also is consumer behavior, learning to switch things off, saving energy, etc., etc. So there's a lot that needs to be done, and I think my sense is that the new minister does see things that way, and he seems to be very active in trying to make that happen. So, I wish him the best, and I hope all of us wish him the best, because he's like, everybody wants him to succeed. It doesn't matter which political party you're in. It's like the you go guy. Yeah.
So recently there's been, we're talking about municipalities and them, various municipalities exerting, or rather the desire to exert more control over the grid. What do you think of the tariff increases that are over and above nurses' recommendation increases by the city of Cape Town?
Well, I think it's completely unacceptable.
What can we do about it, though?
Well, I think the citizens of Cape Town should protest, and we should, show our dissatisfaction. It's bad enough that we have all these terrible increases, inflation, the effects of, global politics driving up food prices, electricity prices, and so on. And then on top of that, you get, people who whack us twice as hard as they're actually supposed to. So in my view, it's very distasteful, but, not to be unexpected.
Why is it best practice, or rather universal practice, for municipalities to slap on an additional tariff increase on top of the increases that from Eskom?
Well, it's not practice to slap on additional increases. The way the electricity works is Eskom supplies some customers directly, and then it supplies some municipalities to supply customers. So obviously they are able to put on a charge for doing that because they maintain the wires, the infrastructure and everything. So it's not so much that they control the grid, it's much more the local distribution. So municipalities traditionally have generated revenue from this, which they wouldn't have otherwise. So I think that's a good model. And in fact, I think Eskom shouldn't be supplying anybody directly. It should all be done through local authorities, because that helps us to build strong local governments who've got financially, sound. But when the tariff is set, that should be the tariff. You shouldn't be allowed to go and add on a whack on top of that. Then what's the point of having the tariff,
So you're saying that whatever the increase in prices is from Eskom, from NERSA, municipalities should stick to that?
Yeah, and I think that should be regulated. You should say, if NERSA says the tariff is R1.50, and then the municipality is allowed to, for example, charge 15 cents on top of that, 10%, that should be regulated, and there should be no exceptions to that.
An article came out on the 21st of June, just a month ago, and I think it's gone largely unnoticed by the ANC and all opposition parties and the public in general. Cape Town secures 2 billion for water, public transport and electricity projects. This is from News 24. It says that the city of Cape Town has secured 100 million euros, that equates to 2 billion rand, in development finance for infrastructure projects. This is a development loan provided by France's Development Bank. It says that the bulk of the funding will be directed to water and sanitation, followed by public transport initiatives called urban mobility. That's 24% of it. And access to electricity, 17% of it. So if the city of Cape Town is securing these loans, why then do they slap on an increase to the electricity rates over and above what the NERSA increase is?
Well, by the way, I forgot to say, when I was commenting as the chairman of Armscor, I'm the chairman of Armscor. Now I'm commenting as Phillip Dexter. So
Yes.
there's nothing
Okay.
it's very important that the listeners and the viewers should understand. I'm not here just as the chairman of Armscor. You happen to have asked me questions in that capacity.
Yes.
So I think, first of all, the principle of taking loans to build infrastructure is not a wrong one. I think there's not enough of that happening, and that's the reason we have the problems we do. Because if we don't have the resources available locally, then we should be able to get loans. But I'm not sure that we don't have enough resources locally. I think we probably have more than enough resources to fund all the infrastructure that we need. It's just that the way financial institutions work in this country, they don't want to put it into infrastructure because the return is too low for them. They'd much rather put it into micro lending and stuff like that so that they can charge working class people 50% interest rather than getting 10% back for building water pipes. So let's assume you have to go and get a loan from an international institution. Nothing wrong with that. But my question is, how did you get the loan? How did you select this institution that you're lending money from? And what is the rate that you're charging on the loan? Because in the article I read, it makes no mention of what the rate is. It just says it's a better rate. Well, better than what?
Yeah.
Better than lending from a micro lender? I don't know. Is it better than 50%? So that's the issue for me. Because as long as that money is going into building infrastructure and it's doing good for people, that's great. But was that the best deal we could get? For me, it's like the BMW story. Do the police really need BMWs? I mean, honestly speaking. And then on top of that, we need to buy them and have them just sit in a car park somewhere? That's not value for money. And like I'm saying, you don't see that story in the Daily Maverick.
No, for sure. You wouldn't. You need to go to Facebook and Insta, and you need to go to TikTok to find those stories.
Yeah.
And
Or you can listen to the Roscoe Palm show.
You can listen to the Roscoe Palm show on Cape Conscious Media, also on Africa. Shout out to Sebastian Peterson. Big shout out to Sebastian Peterson, the screen actor. Now back to this the 2 billion rand loan. My information is that there was no public participation process around it. All financial statements released to view the repayments, unless this was presented as a line item when they tabled the budget. But then when they tabled the budget, the state of the opposition in the city of Cape Town is so dire that this thing would have gone over their heads and far away. So why don't we have an effective opposition that reads the briefing packs?
Well, I think you're right about that, number one, about the opposition. But two, if they didn't follow a process, open and transparent public process, you have to ask yourself why. I think taking a loan of that magnitude is a matter for all of the ratepayers and taxpayers in the city of Cape Town, which includes you and me. So I'm like you, I want some more information. So I would hope that one of the councillors in the city of Cape Town would ask that question, because by rights they should have access to all that documentation. There should be recordings. First of all, there should be where this advert was placed to get the RFP, all the people who submitted proposals, how they were evaluated, and finally what the terms and conditions of the loan are. And none of that is there in the article.
Well, maybe one of the councillors from any of the opposition parties, or in fact the governing party in the city of Cape Town and the province, can enlighten us about that. I think it's a failure of oversight, a complete failure of oversight. Now, the big thing that everybody is talking about, especially in light of, we see all these resources being deployed to the Southern Cape for these 3 wards. We're looking at potentially a coalition government at national level. What are the dangers and the opportunities of this for South Africans and ordinary South Africans?
Well, I think, in my view, coalition governments have been an absolute disaster for the country. I think in very, very few cases have they worked well. And I think those were early on in our democracy. The Western Cape being a good example, when the ANC didn't quite have a majority and was able to form a coalition government in the province and in various towns. So I think at local level, it's perhaps not such a big issue because, to my mind, councils shouldn't be dealing with strategic issues that relate to the country's future so much. They should be focusing on water, services, protecting the citizens, so on and so on. So when you come to national, I think it's a completely different kettle of fish. If you look at the history of our country, I believe that should the ANC lose power and an alliance of opposition parties come to power, it's going to be a very rocky road for us as a country. And I say that because none of the opposition parties, in my view, have an agenda for development, for change, for transformation. In fact, some of them are anti that, like the DA. They are openly anti-black economic empowerment. They're openly anti-transformation. And they openly play the race card, for example, mobilizing colored people by telling them that, the ANC is against colored people's interests and discriminates against them. So they're stoking up racial hatred in that way, the kind of behavior of these opposition parties. Then some of them are just openly populist with the craziest, wackiest ideas. And some of them are organizations of ex-criminals, So I think the stability of our country would be severely compromised by an opposition a ruling party that's made up of all these coalition parties. What may work is, if you have one of the parties that's big enough, like the ANC, saying having 40% and managing to get 11% from some other parties, that would still mean that that party was dominant. And I think we've seen that with the DA in the Western Cape. It started out not as a majority, but as the largest party. Mm-hmm. And it's governed in Cape Town, for more than a decade now. Mm-hmm. So it's maintained that stability because it's still the largest party. But where you have a fractious situation with, and we've seen that with these hung councils, where the DA and the NC are roughly the same size. They both, one is big enough to cobble together a coalition, but it's not the largest. So one of the things I think the government's been looking at is rules about how to make coalitions work, and I think that's important. For example, the largest party should be the one that starts building a coalition. You shouldn't be allowed to do that as a minority party. There are other countries who do that. So because it is a democracy and the will of the people must be, what is implemented. So you can't have a party that wins 10%, cobbling together an alliance with another 40% of parties and ruling, when you had a party that, say, got 49% of the vote. That is a recipe for disaster. And that's what we're seeing in many of our councils.
So the largest, if you win the largest amount of vote, you have the right to then form the government.
That's right.
Nantel, you wanted to have an input?
I want to ask a question, and I really hope that I'm not too off with this question, but it's just something that Phillip just said now. It reminded me of something. So you just said now that some parties deliberately divide colours and black people. Now my question is, and this is to be more fair, right? In my mind, don't you think that the ruling government, the idea when it comes to when you apply for a job, where they say to the colours that you are black but you're not African, when you apply for a job, don't you think that is also creating the division and stuff like that? I seriously hope I'm not.
I think it's a good question.
I asked Benson the same question, and he blamed corporate basically. I'm not really happy with this, but I would like to get your input on that, man.
So I think what Benson was referring to is that in the past we've seen people applying affirmative action in a very wrong way, and BE for that matter, by saying, because if you read the Act, it's very clear. It says that the historically disadvantaged, that means people who are classified as black, colored, Indian, Chinese people, women, and people with disabilities. So it's not just about race, first of all. The idea is that historically these people suffered an injustice. So you create an enabling mechanism to make the labor market fair for them, or to make competing for a tender fair. And I think there's nothing wrong with that principle. It's very progressive, and it's one of the only ways you'll be able to give a fair chance to a black child to become a doctor, or a black company to win a government tender. So I think that that's it. What we did see, and this arose in certain instances, including the very famous case at Correctional Services, where people manipulated this to say, no, we've got enough coloreds in this department, we need more Africans, therefore we're not hiring colored people. And that's wrong. So I think what the new legislation is trying to do is to say, look, there are local demographics as well that you have to take into account, because if you were not to take into account, you would create conditions where there would be an imbalance. You know, if you look at, let's say, a place where some people got better education under apartheid than others, so they would be in all the skilled jobs, etc., etc. So those things are not an attempt to divide people. I think the attempt to divide people is when people come along and say, you see, that's anti-colored or that's anti-Indian. Because it's not. It's about pro-justice and pro-ensuring fairness in the labor market. So, but I think at a communications level, I don't think it's handled very well. And I think there's not enough education. You know, our whole, if you think, starting with our Constitution, we don't, you know, in America, people have to learn the Constitution. People have to understand it. We're not teaching people the Constitution. We're not educating the public about why we have certain legislation. Instead, they have to watch a boring show on Parliament, you know, where the parliamentarians are falling asleep themselves.
I think I'm lucky because my wife is in HR director.
Yeah.
So I can ask her like directly,
Yes.
but she's not affiliated with any political party. So I'm getting a true practitioner of labor really. So, but South Africa doesn't have that. But I still feel that the government could do a better job with saying that we colored people are not African men. That I think that for me, when I started thinking about that, I think that started the division, man. Because it's almost like, where was I born then? You know what I'm saying? And
no, that's fundamental. And you know, part of it is the history of our country. But also, again, the failure of us to move with the time. You see, we are all Africans if we were born here. And, you know, even people like Robert Sobukwe and Steve Biko, who were regarded as Africanist, you know, which I don't like that term, said that. But so did Ruth First. You know, she was a white Jewish woman born in South Africa. And she said, I'm an African. I'm a Pan-African, in fact. So I think you're absolutely right, these labels. So why do we have these labels? They were created by apartheid, actually. Because to say they were Africans meant that some people defined themselves as European. You know, that's what it meant. Secondly, with colored people, that label was used to try and ensure that this difference was created. And that goes back centuries in our country. So you're absolutely right, Natal, that we've got to relook at these terms and stop using terms in the way we do. Because if you were to say, well, people who were historically classified in this way are beneficiaries. But number one, they're all Africans. We don't start with saying some people are Africans. Because in any way, the affirmative action says if you weren't born in South Africa, you don't qualify for affirmative action. You know, that's very important. If you're a black African who comes from Nigeria to South Africa, you don't qualify for affirmative action. And that's because you didn't suffer the same injustice as a person who was formerly classified as African, colored, or Indian, or a woman, or you were differently abled.
I think Bianca says, your friend?
Yes.
So she spoke about this about, but her thing was more about, her TikTok was more about a white person saying that that the white person is African. And her argument was that the African actually speaks to your heritage, really. But I get what she's saying in that regard, I really do. But I think if we're really serious about days like Heritage Day, and you want to bring everybody together, we're gonna have to start with that classification. Yeah. We're gonna have to abolish it and say we are all African and really live it, man. You know what I'm saying? Not just on the one day when we tell people to braai and hope everything is gonna be fine. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully everybody's braai turns out lekker and everybody the South Africa is happy. But we need to. I think we should start with that first thing.
Then there's another spanner that's thrown in the works of Africanness and identity. If you look at the recent thing between that MMA guy Drikus and Israel Adesenya, so Drikus is a white guy who was congratulated by the DA for for beating a guy and then being the next in line to fight Stylebender. He's saying that I'm a real African despite being white, and Israel Adesenya, who's a black guy, came through New Zealand. So the Africanness is like a contested terrain. So I can tell what's going to happen with that Drikus Israel fight. There's going to be two camps. There's the white conservatives who backing Drikus to be like, yes, we are African too. And then there's also sort of more or less like African is blackness. So that fight is going to be politicized, and it's going to be a microcosm of this competition over identity.
But identities are always contested because identities are all socially constructed. You know, the very notion of race is a nonsense biologically. There's no such thing as race. So where I agree with Natal is that, you know, for example, if you want to say you're African, and this is what I think Bianca was getting at, it is a question of heritage, because if you go back in time, there weren't white people in Africa. But there were people whose ancestors, colored people today, whose ancestors were here. So those people are Africans. The descendants of the Khoi and the San and all of these people, the Griqua people, all of them are Africans. But I think then there's generational, because people who came here from India were exploited. Now, their parents were brought from India, their grandparents. The children who were born here are not Indians, they're Africans. They were classified as Indian by the apartheid government. Of course, they have some Indian heritage and culture and, you know, mood, music, food, and so on. You know, I mean, apart from the American government and its terrible, antics around the world, I love the way America addresses this, because you're allowed to call yourself an African American or an Italian American. That means we're all Americans, but we acknowledge, well, we have a different heritage, but we're the same. So it eliminates difference. What we're doing is we're accentuating the difference all the time. And I agree with you, because you look at Heritage Day, it makes a mockery of the thing. White people braai at home, African people braai at home, colored people braai, you very seldom see them braaiing together, because they still live in the same neighborhoods and ghettos. The spatial separation of people hasn't even been dealt with, you know. But yeah, so I'm with you on this one.
Just to say, I think I agree with the general sentiment that the ANC or the government puts out these policies and then has this really bad communications. They just let it fly, and that they allow the spin or the misinformation to be put on it. It can't be left to like Bianca van Wyk and Darren Camphor to interpret the legislation that is put out by the ANC for people. It shouldn't fall on me and Darren and Bianca to correct myths and misinformation. So what can the ANC do better in communicating this stuff?
Well, look, I think all of us are responsible as citizens. So it does fall on you and Bianca and Darren and everyone else. We should all be fighting ignorance. We should all be, ensuring that we accentuate positive things and look at how we change our country for the better. But I think you are right in that the ruling party, in this case the ANC, and the government have a particular responsibility, and they're not really taking it. Well, I wouldn't say not taking it seriously. They're just not doing it effectively. You know, during the years of the anti-apartheid struggle and communities organizing, we had fantastic organizations that used to educate people using newspapers, comic books. You know, we've got radio shows, community radio, podcasts like yours. You don't see government with an active strategy coming to say, hey, Nantel, we want to come and talk about this affirmative action with you. You have to go and find them to do it. So I think it's a huge, big gap, because if you do that, you deal with this, you close the gap for mischievous people who want to mobilize on race, who want to be negative. So it really is a weakness of the ANC and of the government.
Yeah. I'm Roscoe Palm. You're watching Cape Conscious Media, and you're also listening to the show on Africa Radio. I want to get back to policy issues and the failure of some of these policies and institutions that have given opposition parties the opportunity to form a coalition government and topple the ANC. Now, my take on BEE, or broad-based black economic empowerment, is that it doesn't affect the spaza shop owner or somebody who's with a very, very small, a micro business. You already need to be a lieutenant of industry, and BEEE allows you to be a captain of industry. So how can you really need to have access to knowledge and finance and partnerships in established business circles to access this kind of leverage. So what in broad-based black economic empowerment can change, or rather be refined?
Well, I'm not sure that I agree with you. I think there is access. I mean, we have microfinance things, we have support for small business in government, you have institutions like CEDA and so on, and they're currently going through a restructuring. I think where you're right is that it's difficult for people, again, because of the lack of information, to access those things. So like a lot of things, the policy is good, but the implementation or the execution of the policy is poor. And I think you are right that it does seem that the wealthier and the more powerful and those who succeed are able to access the benefits of BEE or affirmative action, or whatever the case may be. But I think in particular BEE. So you see this critique of black people who've made money and they've become rich and famous and powerful. Mm-hmm. Well, look, first of all, I think the reason we had a national liberation struggle in this country was because people were discriminated against and were not able to involve themselves in business. During apartheid, if you were a black person, you couldn't own a shop on the high street. And by black, I mean those classified as African, colored, and Indian. You couldn't open a shop in the center of Cape Town. So the idea that it's wrong for people to become successful in business and you make money, that's crazy. This is a capitalist country. I'm a socialist, but even I understand that you can't stop people from wanting to make money. They should be allowed the opportunity. What the law should be doing is to say, we recognize that historically you were denied this, so therefore we're giving you a leg up, we're supporting you. The real issue for me is, when should you no longer qualify for BEE? Because I think if you're a billionaire and you've built a huge, big mining business, for example, why would you still need BEE? Mm-hmm. And why would you want it? Why? Because I don't think that's the intention of the policy, is just to keep allowing you to accumulate more and more. It's to say, how do we lift up people from the bottom? China's been very successful at this. So I think we should be saying, first of all, we're about economic empowerment. We want to lift everyone off the bottom. Whether you're white, colored, Indian, black, doesn't matter. We don't want anyone living in poverty. And we want everyone to have a chance to open a business, to be successful. If you're a white kid today and you're 18 years old, you're like, why the hell am I not being given support? Mm-hmm. And you're right, you should be. If you're a young entrepreneur, you should be getting support from government. But then we should also recognize that because you came from a poor family or you were black, your parents didn't have the ability to take out a bond and invest in your company to start it, which is the truth. That's what happens in wealthy. That's called generational wealth. Mm-hmm. So it's that failure to, once again, to one, communicate the policy properly. Two, to look at how do we refine the policy, because it's 30 years now.
Mm-hmm.
If you're telling me that Cyril Ramaphosa still needs black economic empowerment, I mean, he's the president of the country. He's a billionaire. Why does he need BEE? But if you're a young kid who comes from Khayelitsha, you need BEE.
Yes.
But equally, if you're a white kid who comes from a working class neighborhood, you also need to be economically empowered. That's the way the policy should be looked at. And I think you're right, some of these policies we have to revise them and change them.
Just before we go on to the next topic, I want another stick that I think not opposition parties beat the ANC with, but I think the ANC beats the ANC with in terms of reaping the penalties of electoral performance. Is the failure of some of our state-owned enterprises. Now, you are the chairperson of a state-owned enterprise, so you do have the inside track into how some of these SOEs fail and constantly need to be bailed out. I'm talking about SAA, we've spoken about Eskom. What is the golden thread that runs through the failures of some of these state-owned enterprises? And how do we fix, in the case of SAA, how do we fix this?
Well, look, I think first of all, you can't lump all these SOEs together. Mm-hmm. So some of the things are very similar across SOEs and government, I think there are general failures that relate to not having the systems in place, like municipalities have, for managing finances and so on. So there's that kind of functionality and efficiency issue. The second thing is that there are state-owned entities that were deliberately targeted as part of state capture and before that, because they're places for people to loot and make money. This didn't start under the ANC. If you look at the arms business in particular, there's a fantastic book by Henny van Vuren about apartheid and arms dealing. When the South African government used to buy weapons illegally because it couldn't buy them, it would use people to smuggle them to the country. So it would buy an AK-47 from Bulgaria, take it to Denmark. They buy it for $10 in Denmark, take it to Denmark. The guy who puts it on the ship in Denmark to sail it to South Africa would say it's $50. When it gets to the port in South Africa, the government official here would say it's $100. And when the politician who was in charge of that would say to the army, it's $200. Mm-hmm. So that's still happening. And that's part of the system, Capitalism by its very nature is corrupt in that sense. But I think we went through a particular experience here where institutions were targeted by organized crime. And you see that at Eskom, you see that at Transnet. I don't think, fortunately, we haven't seen that at Armscor to date. We saw it at Denel. The classic case being the Guptas, obviously. But there were many, many people who were doing this. It wasn't just the Guptas. There were white-owned companies that had dodgy coal contracts with Eskom all along. So it's part of a systemic issue. And I think, once again, what the ANC failed to do was to address that issue in terms of its own political structures, that led to the state capture period. Now that we've gone through that, I just feel that there's not enough emphasis being put on governance and ensuring that these institutions work properly. People blame cadre deployment all the time, and I'm so sick of this tune. Every political party appoints people that it wants to run things. You see, there's a subtle, or even not so subtle, racism in the critique of cadre deployment. It's that basically you see the black guy that the ANC appoints, he's the problem. It's just not true. We've got Armscor, we've got engineers, we've got professional people. Eskom, the guy who's running the power station is black. They're doing a great job. So the notion that cadre deployment is the issue is wrong. Yes, sometimes people deploy the wrong cadre, but that's not just the ANC. Mm-hmm. We've seen that in the DA. We've seen that in other political parties where they've had problems. So it's, again, let's try and separate fact from fiction, and let's communicate better about what the problems are. And once again, as you said, the ANC seems to need no help in hurting itself in this particular instance. Yeah.
It's still coming back to the, let's say, the SAA issue. We can't keep bailing out SAA in perpetuity, but we can't give up that national asset to private hands. That's my view. So what is in your personal opinion as a private citizen, what is your opinion about how we can go about at least starting to fix this thing?
Well, I think the SAA story is a very interesting one. So let me first declare that as the Chief Operating Officer of Nahau Investment Holdings, we actually put in a bid for SAA and we lost. We were very upset, but that's the way it goes. With all the problems that were there at that Takatso consortium, it's interesting for me to see that SAA is flying. It seems to be doing well. It hasn't asked for a bailout. So maybe it's going to be a success story. Of course, the government now only owns 26% of SAA. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with that in principle, because if government didn't have the capital to bail, to make it run properly, and it needed to bring in private sector partners, and as long as it keeps, the taxpayers' interest, because it's got to get dividends to get back all the money it put in, so it needs to be a shareholder, then I'm really not so opposed to that. I think what's important in any of these things is the process by which partners are identified. If it's a tender, how it's awarded, all of those things. Was it fair? Was it proper? Is it all above board? And, that for me is the issue. And then monitoring to make sure that it performs better going forward. I was interested to see that the post office got a bailout a couple of weeks ago. Now, I grew up with the post office, and I've lived in countries all over the world. I don't understand how it's not possible to have an efficient postal service. It's like, how difficult is it? You collect a letter, and private companies are doing it.
Yes.
They're doing it very well. My other one was Petro SA. I couldn't understand how they couldn't make money. It's like owning a big petrol station. You buy the petrol for R1.50 and you sell it for R2. The reason they got into trouble is they were investing money in all sorts of things, wasting money, doing stuff, because they don't stick to their core business and they don't do it well or efficiently. And that is a challenge of state-owned entities, because even in China, they recognized competition is essential to make the market work efficiently. So there's nothing wrong with state-owned entities, but they shouldn't be monopolies. There's no reason why Eskom should have the monopoly of power generation in our country. And if it was selling through the municipalities, it wouldn't have the monopoly of the market. It might be okay for it to be the monopoly as the grid for national strategic purposes. But then it shouldn't be necessarily making a profit out of that, because it's about a service to people. But what we want to ensure is that it doesn't make a loss.
Yes.
That's a critical thing.
Yeah. You speak about remembering with fondness the post office. Nantel, do you remember what I remember with fondness something from my childhood. Remember the milkman?
Yes.
Oh yes.
Remember
yes.
remember?
Yes.
What happened to the milkman? That was the best part of the day when you were a small child. Like maybe you leave the milk bottles at the door.
Supermarkets killed the milkman.
Yeah, and then they used to drive around in those white trucks.
The ice cream man.
The ice cream man. No, the ice cream man is still very much around. Still playing that same tune from 1960.
But you don't see them as much.
Yeah, there must be one ice cream truck that does like the whole of Cape Town. It's like that tune. You hear it coming from
But they don't play
miles.
the tune anymore.
They play the same tune.
Nowadays do like rave songs and stuff like that.
Really?
They upgraded a bit.
They've upgraded.
Okay. So the last thing that we're gonna talk about. You mentioned China. There's a very big conference happening next month in South Africa, the BRICS conference, where the heads of state of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are going to be meeting in this country. Let's deal with the big sensational topic first of all. Vladimir Putin and the prospect, or rather the non-prospect of him being arrested. Why is there such an appetite to see this guy behind bars from mainly liberal media in South Africa?
First of all, it's not liberal media, it's conservative
Conservative
media.
media, yes.
Liberals, that they're very few and far between. But look, obviously it's part of what we're talking about, that global, what's going on in the world. So you see, BRICS is seen as a threat to the West, to US hegemony, to Europe, etc. For me, I think that's a complete misnomer, because BRICS was not established to threaten anybody. It was established for us to cooperate to ensure development in what we call South-to-South relations and business. So we're already trading with China, we're already trading with Russia. How do we ensure that we strengthen that? I think the only reason we had to do that was because the current system of global finance and trade is stacked against us. In the US dollar, for example. So the economies change and develop all the time. I think it's the response of people to it. The irony for me in the moment is that the left, socialists, people like me, are more in favor now of globalization than capitalists in America, because globalization doesn't suit them anymore, because they're losing. You see, they were fine with globalization when they were winning. It's typical. Oh, we're not winning, let's change the rules. And that's the problem for me with it. So I think BRICS is important. The summit is in August, by the way.
August, sorry, yeah.
But there are lots of activities happening even today. You know, there are all these forums of business people, etc. So for me, what's great about BRICS is that it gives us an opportunity to address poverty, inequality, unemployment, and the lack of development across all those countries. We started out with 5. I think there are like 19 countries who want to join now, including some of the more powerful, economies around the world. I would think that the West would be in favor of this, because it means people are taking their own future and their own development seriously, instead of seeing it as a threat. Coming to Putin, well, obviously, the International Criminal Court have issued a warrant. I don't think correctly so, because the way they issued the warrant and the whole process is dubious in and of itself. Secondly, I think the court is dubious in and of itself, because the Americans don't go to the ICC; they don't hold themselves accountable.
They're not signatories to the Rome Statute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and other countries as well. So to argue that because Putin is coming to South Africa, we have a duty to arrest him. First of all, to arrest a head of state in your country, I would think anybody with a modicum of an intelligence would understand it's a very complicated matter, because that person represents a country. They're not themselves. So, very doubtful that it's a good idea to do. Secondly, you're going to arrest somebody who's bigger than you, got more guns than you, got stronger in every way. It's like, asking a traffic policeman to go and stop a terrorist cell. How's he going to do that with a handgun when they've got automatic rifles and explosives? So I think the very notion of this is problematic. But it's obviously been done because they want to divide the BRICS countries. They want to cause problems for the BRICS summit. And they want to see us fail. So I don't think it's possible for South Africa to arrest Putin, even if we wanted to. Secondly, I think the president has recently given an affidavit stating why this is an unacceptable demand on us as a country. Yeah, so, I'd say good luck to anyone who tries to arrest Putin. I believe the Western Cape, the premier, said he's going to arrest Putin.
Yeah.
So
you must. I see.
Yeah, personally, I think the president should say, on this one, Alan Winde, I'm handing it over to you. Here's the powers, you're going to arrest Putin.
You do you.
You do you.
So, look, let's compare BRICS with NATO. What are the differences between BRICS, which you say is an economic bloc, and NATO, which is a security grouping?
Well, that's exactly the point.
What are the implications there?
Well, there are no implications, because they're two different things. NATO was a defensive organization, and I think it's been turned into an offensive organization, which was, started to ensure peace and security for those countries who are members of it. It was built in the era of the Cold War, when the threat of nuclear war, the threat of, the war between the socialist countries and the capitalist countries. The world has changed. We've moved on. I personally don't think we need a NATO. And I think the reason we have it is not because they need defending. It's because they're using it to actually push a particular agenda, and they want to destroy countries. And NATO has become an imperialist tool rather than a defensive organization. But its nature is that it's a military organization for cooperation between those people for their mutual defense. BRICS is a development organization. It's saying, we've come together not to fight, there's no war going on here. We want to say, how do we improve the growth rate in South Africa? How do we increase infrastructure in India? How do we cooperate to make our economies grow faster? How do we trade better? How do we finance things? So the BRICS Bank. So they're two completely different organizations, which is why BRICS can't really get involved in defense or political issues. It must stick to what it does, you know.
And that's why it's possible for us to be in BRICS and an ally of Russia within that configuration, but neutral in any conflict that Russia has with, let's say, in Ukraine.
Precisely, because we're not allies with Russia in terms of its conflicts. We are trading with Russia. By the way, you know, whatever people may say, there's a lot of trade going on between Russia and European countries at the moment. And everyone's crying about it because others are saying, well, you know, the sanctions must stay. Others are saying, no, we need the diesel, we need the gas. So I think if you understand it that way, that we're partners in terms of economic development. Therefore, if we think America's a democracy or not, or Russia's a democracy or not, we're trading partners. I think the issue becomes complicated because people expect us to behave in BRICS as if they're behaving in NATO. And we're not, there's no interest for us to get involved in this war. First of all, what would be benefit from it? And how would it help the war for us to choose sides? I don't think it would be to anybody's benefit, and certainly not to ours. And I think that's the most important thing. We're South Africans. We must look after our interests first, above and beyond anything else.
I've got one more question to ask you about BRICS. I see you closing the notebook. You're indicating that you're like now done with me. Like moving on to the next one.
That was the deal.
But China's role in Africa. Now, for me, it makes no difference whether an artisanal miner is digging up minerals to make iPhones or making Huawei devices. How do we then tell, or rather engage with other powers that we want a different development path than what the West has imposed on us? How can BRICS help Africa to develop its own industries?
Well, that's the point. That's what BRICS is there for. So you're absolutely right. I mean, historically, people have come to this continent to plunder it for resources and take away the raw materials. And I think, unfortunately, some Chinese companies have done that as well. But that's not China's orientation as a country. What they've also done is invest into rail, high-speed rail, ports, etc., etc. If you look at the statistics, there's more investment into Africa by China than any other country in the world, including the United States. There's more trade now with China than many countries, including ours. You know, China's such a huge trading partner. So I think you're right. It's not about, is the money that's coming in American, Chinese, or whatever, or is the person who's mining the cobalt Chinese or Swiss or German. It's about, let's do things in a fair and proper way. Let's not exploit children. Let's not super exploit workers. Let's not have people dying in unsafe conditions. Let's do things in such a way that when we invest, we take the resources out, we beneficiate them locally, we create jobs, and it's a win-win. We know the advantage of Africa is we have all these resources. We have all this land for agriculture. We want to develop it. We want to exploit those resources, but we want to do it in a sustainable way and for the benefit of Africans. That's the important thing. We want to see the African child go forward into the next century, having the opportunity to be a doctor, to be a lawyer, and not to die down the pit of a mine, getting out stuff, whether it's for a Huawei phone or an Apple phone, as you put it.
So then, last one, and you can see I'm closing my
Second
notebook.
last. That was second last. This is
Okay,
last
no,
last.
this is last. This is last. And I'm choosing
Last,
between.
last, Nato.
I'm choosing between
You're gonna switch him off,
a Liverpool question and a Zuma question. What do you want? Let's do Zuma. Okay, the guy is in Russia.
No, he's in Belarus.
He's in Belarus.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think he's coming back? I know the move. I would pull a runner if I was that guy. I'd just kind of stay there, just like hang with Prigozhin.
I have no idea.
The guy is 80.
No, he has to come back, obviously.
He has to come back.
Oh, well, I don't think he wouldn't come back.
Yeah.
Oh.
Let's see.
No?
Liverpool predictions for the season? Where are you going to finish?
Well, first of all, we're naturally the champions, so we're going to finish first. And secondly, we never walk alone.
We never walk alone. Anyways, Philip, thanks for coming in.
Thank you,
I
Roscoe.
got to give the people what they want. They wanted a long form Philip Dexter, so thank you for indulging the people. I'm Roscoe Palm. You're watching this on Cape Conscious Media and you're listening to it on Africa Radio. Nantel, thank you so much for co-piloting today, as always.
All good. Thanks.
Cool.
It was a very nice one.
Cool.
Thank you very much, both of you.
And
Keep
join
it up.
us next Monday, hopefully next Monday.
We love Cape Conscious Media. Keep it up.
Cool. Thanks, man. And we are out.